Hi, everybody. This is Eve Hauer. You're listening to Rejuvenation on the Land of Israel Network. It is very early on August 25th, 2019, the 23rd day of Av, 5779, the beginning of a new week. We didn't end last week very well here in Israel. Just before Shabbat, the funeral of Rina Shenrav, who was murdered while hiking to a spring with her father, Rav Eitan ben Chana, her brother Dvir ben Shira Esther, who are both still hospitalized. The brother in worse shape than the father. But hopefully they will both make full recoveries, although spiritually, emotionally, they're not going to recover from this. Another family devastated. Good news when it comes to Nachum Elimelech Raphael ben Zahava Rivka, the boy who was run over with his sister the week before. He apparently opened his eyes on Shabbat and looked at his mother and, made some signs that the brain damage or whatever it is that he's suffering from and has had a few surgeries from will hopefully, he'll also hopefully make a full recovery. And this is what's happening. They're aiming and trying and succeeding in killing our children. And whether this is a new wave, a continuation of the wave, we just commemorated this week 90 years since Tarpat, since 1929, the pogroms all over the land of Israel, but the worst was in Hebron, where 67 Jews were killed. And from what we're hearing from the Arab media all this week and from people, and they've been photographed and they've been videotaped, that they would do it again. And so we need to realize that for all of our wishful thinking and fantasizing. Nothing's really changed here in the Middle East, except that there's a strong Israel now and there's a place for Jews to defend themselves. And we need to internalize the fact that this isn't going away and that our neighbors still have the same nefarious ideas that they had before. But in all this, someone sent me part of a podcast that I will not be subscribing to. I'm just going to play some of it for you. It's from TLV1, and the people speaking in this podcast are Sarah Hirschhorn, Israel Studies, and I know her. She wrote a book on the settler movement, and also a Haaretz writer, which already tells you something, Ohad Zeltzer Zubida, and Noah Ephron. So they are discussing the tale of two settlements and an epiphany that they apparently have had. I'll let you hear a few minutes, I'll respond, and we'll do it that way. So here we go.
For our second discussion. So, Ohad, has the story we've been telling ourselves about settlements since the time your father was a baby been all wrong?
So, here's how the story of the birth of the settlements is usually told. In April 1968, a rabbi named Moshe Levinger came with his wife and kids to Hebron to hold a Passover Seder and spend the holiday. The family rented a room in the downtown Al-Naher El-Khalid hotel, had their Seder, and then refused to leave. Over the holiday, many well-wishers came to visit the Levingers, among them writer Natan Alterman and labor MK Igal Alon. Some stayed, excited by the notion of Jews settling in the historic land of Israel. When the holiday ended, the rabbi and a bunch of other religious ideologues from the Movement for Greater Israel refused to leave. The government, unsure what to do, offered to let the Levingers and their fellow travelers settle nearby in an abandoned army base. That became Kiryat Arba, the first settlement, and now a bedroom community of 7,500 people. In this way, the settlements were foisted on the government and the rest of us by clever, committed, and religiously inspired ideologues. Now here is how a researcher named Erez Magor, a PhD candidate at NYU, tells the story of the birth of Israeli settlements in the West Bank. On the evening of June 7th, 1980, 33 families commandeered an empty lot near Katamon in Jerusalem, pitched tents, improvised a kitchen, and called it home. The next day, they sent a telegram to PM Menachem Begin announcing they'd established a, quote, new settlement within the Green Line in order to force the government to, quote, find a solution to the problem of housing. At the head of the protest was a former Black Panther named Yamin Suissa, who led something called the Tent Movement. The movement argued that the Likud had screwed the people who voted the party into office. Over 3 years of neoliberal privatizing, deregulating, market-forcifying reforms, including shuttering public housing, the Likud had thrown the middle and lower classes to the dogs. The criticism struck a nerve because, well, it was true. In response, the Likud government, and especially Minister of Construction David Levy, father of said Orly Levy, came up with this policy, increasing public investment in affordable housing and infrastructure by establishing a string of settlements beyond the Green Line. That was a quote. In this way, the settlements were a jerry-rigged solution to a practical and political problem going on within Israel that didn't have much to do with religion or ideology. As Magol sees it, there are a bunch of problems with the first story we tell ourselves about where the settlements come from.
Okay, this is Eve. First of all, you're going to love the we, okay? These are Tel Aviv, very left-wing people. We is supposed to, I guess, be the royal we. There's quite a few mistakes in the things that he's saying. First of all, the first settlement, or the first place that Jews went back to live in Judea and Samaria after being ethnically cleansed by the Jordanians in 1948 was actually Kibbutz Kfar Etzion, not far from where I live. That was already in September of 1967, after the famous conference where the Arabs say no to peace, no to recognition, the Khartoum conference, no to peace, no to recognition, no to negotiation. Incidentally, any mention of Arabs or terror is only going to be heard in my voice. They don't seem to count that at all in anything that they're saying. All right, so what you're going to hear now is this guy's idea that the movement to settle Judea and Samaria is not, this is an epiphany that they're having. It's not messianic. It's not people who love the land of Israel. It is economic. It is people who needed cheaper housing, and the Likud needed a place to put these people, and so they decided to settle Judea and Samaria. Incidentally, in the early 1980s, 79-80, the Begin government had a push to settle people all over the land of Israel. The Galilee, for example, there was something called the Plan of the Mitzpim, like the little settlements basically on mountaintops on state land, because the Galilee was 75% Arab. And the government was worried that there weren't enough Jews in the Galilee. And that's, of course, in Israel proper. So there was a lot going on then. It was also the time where the Camp David Accords had been signed, where Begin had promised to leave the Sinai desert. And Israel was going to completely leave the Sinai and turn it over to Egypt. And Israel incurred tremendous debt because of that move, in moving the Air Force bases and a lot of whatever was in the Sinai, and of course losing oil fields that Israel had developed. So there's a lot going on there. This doesn't just happen in a vacuum. But what's astonishing to me is that suddenly they realized that not everybody who moved out to Judea and Samaria was doing it for ideological reasons. Now, of course, they put down Messianic Jews. What I find hilarious is that the left is more Messianic than anybody else right now. Their God is Oslo, and all their sacred people who pushed Oslo and the two-state solution has absolutely no bearing in reality whatsoever. They're talking to themselves. But that doesn't seem to stop them. And what I find in this, and I'll play some more of this, of their podcast, is that they're not embarrassed. Like, if you realize that something that you thought was wrong all these years, you might be like embarrassed, like, wow, I hope I didn't say that to too many people. And I, like, wow, how could I have gotten it so wrong? But it just clicks with them because of a report that someone puts out. And obviously the situation is a lot more complicated. It's not one answer or the other. That not everybody who moved to Judea and Samaria moved for ideological reasons, and they're not even embarrassed to put it out there, like, wow, okay, anybody has known, any little child could have told you, we're talking about for over 50 years, we're talking about for a long time, that people moved out here for a variety of reasons, and that the main reason that you see, for example, more clusters of Jewish communities in the center of the country, like just east of Tel Aviv, is because people needed to get to work. And that you see that the development, let's say, of the southern Hebron Hills has been very, very thin. And that's because they really didn't have an urban center to go to for jobs. Beersheba, which is just to the south of them, has really only started developing in a massive way in the last 10 or 15 years. So, like, anybody could have told you this, but they're so busy, I guess, drinking their espresso and trying not to spill it on their designer clothes on Schenken Street and in their little echo chamber that they're actually not paying attention to what virtually every other Israeli knows. So let's continue.
History of the settlement movement. Why did Israel's governments try to direct the movement to big towns and cities, usually near the border, usually within commuting distance from Tel Aviv, for decades? Asher Weiner, the director of the housing ministry in the 80s, said that an advantage of the settlements built by the Likud was their proximity to, quote, greater Tel Aviv. Messianic fervor would have led to a policy of spreading out through an infinity of very small settlements. Indeed, Na'arei HaGva'ot and some other radical settler groups have tried to do something like this, but the government has mostly fought them, and they have not been very successful overall. Another problem is that the conventional story represents the last 40 years of Israel's history as a story of a tail wagging a dog, with the Rasputinian settlers somehow coercing the rest of us to do their will, diminishing the thoughtful agency, if lamentable decisions, of such serious politicians as David Levy and many others. Still, another problem of the conventional story is that it ignores what generations of 14-year-old Marxists have known never to ignore, that ideas alone don't move history. Rabbi Levinger may have been moved by his belief that God and history had bequeathed Judea and Samaria to Jews, but that belief did not allocate the funds, draw the maps, bulldoze the land, pour the concrete, lay the pipes, pave the roads, and install the streetlights. Yet another problem of the conventional story is that it leaves as a mystery why so many lower and middle class folks, especially those with roots in the Middle East and Northern Africa, came to support the party, the Likud, that supported the settlement movement, which was, at the start anyway, almost exclusively an upper-middle-class Ashkenazi affair. Maybe most importantly, the conventional story messes up our thinking about what needs to be done to protest and fight the present settlement movement. It at least partly blurs who our real political opponents are. A government policy of public housing in places that people actually want to live could do a great deal to reverse the process of settlement. Affordable housing near the queen of ultra-Orthodox cities, Bnei Brak, would empty the just over-the-border Haredi settlement of Modi'in Illit so fast the manhole covers would spin. And finally, it presents the Israeli anti-settlement left to itself and the world as a few liberal, secular, rational Europhiles surrounded by a bunch of crazed messianists and messianic crazies, too addled by ideology to participate in real politics. Understanding the settlements as an outgrowth of specific socio-economic policy choices makes the politics of our age seem less mythic and dystopic. Of course, it must be said that the two stories don't actually contradict one another, and both are probably true to one degree or another, but until now, we've really mostly been told the first. In light of all this, today we will ask, is Magol's retelling of the history of settlements convincing? And if so, what, if any, differences does this new origin story have for the way we understand the settlements and the way we treat them politically? Sarah?
So here we are with the we've been told and the we've been told and the we've been told. They have been talking to themselves because we, meaning a lot of other Israelis, were told a lot of different stories. Weren't just told that the people living out here were messianic crazies and the left were, as he says, such like rational people. Okay, it's a combination of a whole lot of things. And the reason that the Likud and Menachem Begin specifically had many followers among the Middle Eastern Jews was because the left and, let's say, the Labor Party were the Ashkenazi elite, were European focused and still are today, not integrating well into the Middle East, definitely not integrating Middle Easterners well into Israel. And just to throw another thing in there, the kibbutzim, which is part of the Labor Party, got a whole lot of land many, many years ago in order to provide food for a young nation. Many of them have taken that land now and built shopping centers on them, apartment buildings on them, and sold them and kept the money. So when it comes to what is done with the land, and because that's a lot that's spoken about, that the right and that the settlers and their supporters are taking over land that belongs to somebody else, there's a little bit of introspection that needs to be done on the left. Okay, there's much, much more land that they have used, and nobody talks about that because the press is going to cover for certain things. But here we go, and they've decided now that maybe this is socio-economic and not messianic, which means that it can be solved because, as he says about the manhole cover spinning, all right, that all the ultra-Orthodox would move out of their communities. I'm not so sure that that's true. Speaking to people who live in these communities, they're very happy where they are. They don't necessarily want to go into a crowded and smoggy Bnei Brak. They're happy in their communities out here. And some people, without a doubt, came to Judea and Samaria for ideological reasons and fell in love with the communities because of the quality of life. I will use myself as an example. Other people did come out because there was less expensive housing here than there was in the very crowded center of the country. but then fell in love with the place for ideological reasons. So it's a spectrum, and it always has been. And everybody seems to have known that, except this small group of people. Incidentally, Yamina, which is the party of Ayelet Shaked and Naftali Bennett and others, just came out last week with a plan for 113,000 housing units in Judea and Samaria. So everybody realizes that we've got a tremendous housing problem in Israel. It's really a huge problem. These people are saying that, wow, if we just build public housing in Little Israel, then everybody will leave the communities of Judea and Samaria, and that'll solve our problem. I prefer the way that Ayelet Shaked is seeing it, which is that we have an enormous reservoir of land, most of it empty in Judea and Samaria, and that can solve our housing problem, not building more 30-floor skyscrapers in Tel Aviv. When you go around Little Israel now, that's what you see. You just see very, very tall apartment buildings while we have this whole reservoir of land just half an hour away. So, yeah, she sees the problem as well, but they're seeing Judea and Samaria as the solution and not as the problem. So here we go, back to this podcast.
On the one hand, there is a story of the first phase of the settler project, especially the phase prior to the 1973 war, where you really have only a few settlements, one of them being in Hebron, and then later the group was moved to Kiryat Arba, which is a story of messianic fervor and of the euphoric reaction to the 1967 war. And then you have the decade of the 1980s, where the Israeli government piggybacks upon this ideological excitement and sees certain strategic and economic needs of the state in a decade after deflation, economic depression, and war, and the needs of communities that are bursting at the seams in major metropolitan areas, and sees both strategic and economic reasons to disperse the population to the settlements. So I don't think either story is wrong. It's just a sense of putting them within their historical trajectory. Now, what Ellis and others, I guess I would say including myself, are trying to do is pioneer a new generation of research that looks at what has happened basically since the 1970s, which was a small moment in the history of the settler movement, eclipsed now by a much larger economic imperative, and to try to understand the new history of the Israeli settler movement that is less reliant on religious activism and more in tune with the needs of the state or other constituencies beyond those who represent Gush Emunim within the Israeli settler camp. So I think we're looking at a more heterogeneous history today and trying to understand how all the pieces of that story fit together.
So part of what I understand you to be saying is this isn't actually entirely radically new. We sort of knew
Really?
Card. You will remember that hearing people talk about how the way that it was always described to me is how the Likud used the housing crisis in order to advance this ideological agenda. But still, the reason why I think that this is so important is because I think that Magor implies, or maybe says outright, that if we think about this in a different way, then we'll come up the way that we'll react to it will be different in some ways too, which is to say, we on the left usually tell the story of the settlements as this radical, ideological, crazy, messianic thing, like you were saying, Ohad, and that there's no way to fight it except completely to squelch it. And what Magor is saying is, if you look at this partly as something that was facilitated by the destruction of public housing within Israel, then the way that you would fight this on the left would be not to embrace, as the left has done mostly for most of the last 35 or 40 years, the destruction of public housing in Israel, but you would see as part of your politics, including about the occupation and the conflict, the need to have good public housing within Israel. It would connect your leftist social agenda with a leftist agenda about the occupation and about the conflict in a way that would be very, very useful to us, because we have become confused on the left and made our life both easier than it should be for ourselves and harder by identifying our enemies as these mythological. It's true they sort of existed, but this making it seem as though everyone are these crazy messianic religious folks, when in fact that's just a teeny group that doesn't really have much power.
Well,
Did you hear that? Did you hear enemies? Did you hear enemies? Okay, they're talking about fellow Jews who serve in the army, who work in the state, who pay taxes in the state. They're saying enemies. It's amazing. What's also amazing is not one time here do they mention the actual enemies, which would be the Arabs and terrorism and the Palestinian Authority and Fatah and Hamas. And the fact that a lot of people are also living out here for ideological reasons and for housing reasons, but also because a lot of Israelis who do have their brains still in their head realize that if we give up these hills to the real enemy, then little Tel Aviv and these people where they're drinking their espressos are going to be toast because it's all of 9 miles wide, Israel is its waist. But you're not going to hear that mentioned here. This is the sickness of the left. Okay, the other Jews are their enemies, patronizing, hubris. They just are talking to themselves. They've created just a scenario where, and they believe it. They've created a fantasy world where if you just get rid of the Jews in Judea and Samaria, then what? Then everything is just fine. By ignoring the Arabs, that is so disgusting. I mean, it's just so disrespectful, not to mention insane, because we are living in the Middle East and they're all around, and they're not just all around, but we see what they're doing, and they're not just doing it in Judea and Samaria either. But no, let's not at all let any of the facts get in the way of what we want to believe, which is exactly what this podcast is about. So let's finish the last couple of minutes.
Solution that if we think that the settlement project is really just is an issue of banality rather than fanaticism, we would say to ourselves, okay, great, let's build 450,000 housing units in the Galil or the Negev. Problem solved, no Israel-Palestine conflict, or at least no Israel-Palestine conflict from the Israeli point of view. I think
really? It just went away?
Seems to suggest that
no one would say that. They would say the impetus force behind the settlement movement would be diminished to near zero in that case, and then we would have a different context in which to address the conflict.
We have a different conflict in which to address the conflict. I mean, we will still have, say, 20% of the Israeli settler movement that remains ideological, who don't want to leave their homes, and those people live in places that are very much not within the settlement process.
I don't know where she pulls that number out, but after especially what the Jews saw what happened in Gush Katif, not just that any place that we left became a base for terror, but also how miserably the people were treated and how they weren't given proper homes. And 14 years later, they're still suffering. I would say that number, 20%, is a little bit low. Don't know where she's getting it, but there you go.
Settlements in general, whether there's really any difference today between Tekoa and Tel Aviv, and if you relocate, people from Gush Etzion to the Galil, does that solve the Arab-Israeli conflict for you? I'm not sure.
She's not sure if moving people from Gush Etzion to the Galilee will solve the Arab-Israeli conflict. Well, let's see. Let's ask the Arabs. Oh, they would say no, because their problem isn't Gush Etzion. Their problem is a Jewish entity anywhere in the Middle East, or a Christian entity anywhere in the Middle East, or anybody who's not them. So she's not sure? Really? What would make her sure?
My commentary at this point would maybe to serve as a test case. I mean, I'm fairly well versed in Israeli political history, and I have never heard in such detail or in context Magol's side of the story, as we might call it. The story of the settlements in the West Bank has been framed to me as a critical reader of Israeli media as a story of messianic fervor. And this opened like a completely new point of view for me in the way that I understand the settlements and the settlement.
Again, he's not even embarrassed to say that. And he considers himself fairly knowledgeable. And all of a sudden, this guy saying that maybe not everybody is a crazy messianic settler is news to him. I'm embarrassed for him. I really am.
Messianic fervor. And this opened like a completely new point of view for me in the way that I understand the settlements and the settlement project. And if to emphasize that, from Magol's article in Azman Azend, a report that I checked out on Haaretz, it seems that almost half in number, correct me if I'm wrong, of the settlers in the West Bank are Charedim, who live in Modi'in Elit and Beitar Elit.
25%.
25%. That's still a huge number.
I know.
Okay, so first of all, and I'm so glad you checked Haaretz, which is totally always factually correct. I mean, Haaretz is like the Bible. 25% is not 50%. That's a huge difference. So he's throwing out again a number, 50%, and she quickly corrects him to 25%. Again, I don't know what that number is based on, but it went into half in a 10-second conversation. So maybe, just maybe, he shouldn't be relying on Haaretz.
Of people that have no ideological connections to the movement. The government built them housing, public housing. They said, okay, listen, this is near Jerusalem. This is near Gush Dan. Go live beyond the Green Line.
Okay, if someone knows any differently, I would really like to be informed. I am not aware that the government built housing for the ultra-Orthodox in their communities, the main two communities of Kiryat Sefer, Modi'in Elit, and Beitar. All right, my impression, maybe there's some public housing, but my impression is that people had to buy their own apartments. The government didn't hand them anything. So he throws that out. Again, maybe he's right and I'm wrong. First I've heard of it. Happy to be corrected, but I don't think so.
Who are just being moved like pawns, who just need housing. Even 25% is a huge number. I'm not saying
this also begs
who
the
would love
question
to leave for places that are closer to Bnei Brak and Mea
But it
Shearim.
also begs the question about why the left has swallowed this story of the settlements and removes their own responsibility for understanding that this isn't just a problem of religious fanaticism. This is a problem of everyday people. So I think we also have to ask ourselves as academics, as journalists, and otherwise, why the left has been willing to accept
Bingo,
the narrative.
I agree. Exactly.
Because you're idiots. Sorry.
Okay, listen to this.
All right. So that was a nice rise in blood pressure. Hope that did it for you too. And there's more. And that's that 12-minute podcast. But I think it gives you an idea of what we're up against here, at least with a certain group that thankfully is getting smaller all the time. And we see it in our elections. We see it in the parties that represent them. These people who just created their own little world and they're living in it, but it bears no relation to any place real. They probably ride unicorns to work as well. All right, so I'm going to end this now with just a different topic, just to get back to the terror attack on Friday. We're not going to stop walking the land. We're not going to stop going to springs. We're not going to stop hiking. We're not going to stop living here, leftists aside, because for a gazillion reasons. Yes, this is our country, and the Bible says that this land is ours. That's one really nice reason. And we see things coming true that were talked about many, many years ago, but also for security reasons, and also because this is a beautiful land, and also because we need the room and we need the housing. All of those reasons are true. And people are here for many, many different reasons, but we are connected, and the left is getting desperate because the numbers are growing here, and they are losing public opinion because most Israelis are very much rooted to reality and see what's happening. They may not be happy with what's happening, and they may have wished that it would be different, and that their dreams of a two-state solution could have been realized, and that Arabs living here would suddenly decide they want to be democratic and peace-loving and live side by side with Israel. But all of that was not rooted in any kind of understanding of the mentality of the Middle East, in any kind of respect for Islam and where it's going. And again, it doesn't mean that it's every Muslim. And I'm sure some of you are listening saying, but I know really nice Muslims. Guys, I know really nice Muslims. They're not running anything, and definitely not a country here in the Middle East. So it's irrelevant. There are some major problems in Islam. It is far from being the religion of peace that it is touted to being. And in the very toxic and perfect storm here of Arab nationalism and Islamic fanaticism and jihadism, this is not a situation that Israel can in any way, shape, or form afford to once again leave territory that just become a base for terror. We saw it in Sinai, we saw it in Gaza, we saw it in Lebanon, and most Israelis have woken up and actually really smelled the coffee. But anybody who's been on a bus tour with me, some of you listening I know have been, know that I point out the springs wherever we go in Judea and Samaria. On my wine trip just a few days ago in Elon Moreh and in Itamar, I pointed out the springs that the kids are swimming in. The ones that are within the boundaries of the communities are, of course, protected, but many of them are not within the boundaries of the communities because they are on the slopes of the hills. These are the springs that our forefathers used for water during the hot summer months when there's no rain. These are the springs that run all year round. If you're familiar with Jerusalem and the city of David, it's the exact makeup of the city of David, the town on the top, the spring coming out on the side of the mountain in the middle, and then down to the valley. And those springs were a key part of the agriculture and of the drinking water and of the life here in the days before we had pumps and we had electricity. And so those springs are used now for recreation and have been developed and cleaned up all over Judea and Samaria. That is where Rina Shenrav lost her life on Friday. But we are not going to stop going to those springs, and we're not going to stop hiking, and we're not going to stop walking. We're going to count on the army to continue doing its magnificent job in keeping us safe, and have faith that there's a bigger picture here too, and that Hashem also does what he can to keep safe. But we're not hermetically sealed, and things are going to happen. But we have to understand that our enemy, the real enemy, meaning not the Jews who live out here, but the real enemy, isn't going to stop. And the more that we give in, the more that they will gain strength and try and continue to push us off our land. So the more they build illegally and we let them get away with it, and the more that they plant on land that's not theirs and we let them get away with it, the stronger they get, And so all of this are things that have to be stopped. I certainly hope that whatever government comes into power understands that also, the symbolism of what's happening here. And yes, we have power and we need to use it wisely, which just doesn't mean randomly, not at all. But there is an understanding here in the Middle East about respect and self-respect. And the Jews came home to our land, and we need to make sure that everybody knows that we're not going anywhere. Always happy to hold out our hand in peace and come to whatever terms, and we don't want to kill anybody and we don't want to be killed, that's for sure. But what the left does in making things up and putting a mentality and a reality in the Middle East that belongs maybe nowhere in the world, but definitely not in the Middle East, only pushes peace further away. And as I said, frankly, I'm really embarrassed for them. Eve Harrow, Rejuvenation on the Land of Israel Network. Have a great week, everybody. Be safe. Do good things. Thanks to Ben and to Tabitha. Take care, everybody. Goodbye for now.
I call for a vote.
I'm not voting for her.
Only an idiot would vote for me.
Well, I didn't vote for you.
You should know who to vote for.
Who are you going to vote for in the upcoming election? Hi, this is Josh Haston, host of Israel Uncensored on the Land of Israel Network. Full election news and analysis that you're not going to get anywhere else. That's the Land of Israel Network at thelandofisrael.com. Keep it locked in.
If you vote for me, all of your wildest dreams will come true.